Welcome to State of the State. My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest is Billy Hunt, chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party and candidate for state representative for District 68 in the House of Representatives. District 68 encompasses the towns of Bristol and Warren. Welcome to State of the State.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Why don't you begin by telling our audience something about yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So I grew up my whole life. I'm from Portsmouth, Rhode Island originally. I went to Portsmouth High School and eventually on to the University of Rhode Island, where I graduated in 2006 with a degree in business administration. Since 2011, I've been primarily working in the insurance industry, and right now I'm an independent property and casualty insurance agent. So we do everything from home and auto all the way up to commercial insurance as well. And in 2016, I decided I was going to run for office as a libertarian, and I liked it so much that I ran 4 times in 4 years. My high water mark was in the last election in 2020, where I got 40% of the vote against June Speakman, who was the incumbent at the time.
You have a family?
Yes, I just welcomed my young son, William Hunt III. He was born in October of 2020, 2 weeks before Election Day in the last election. So God bless my wife for allowing me to run with all that going on. And we just found out we're expecting our second child, another boy, this August. So a growing family, yes.
Oh, congratulations.
Oh,
and this time will be well in advance of the election.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, like I said, it's something that having babies, as we were talking before the show, is definitely helps you with getting votes for the campaign. But there's also a lot of responsibilities with the family. So we'll see how this election cycle goes. There's a lot that can change between now and June. And with my additional roles, I just took over as chairman of the Libertarian Party back in May at our last convention, at last year's convention. So I got about a year under my belt, and we're planning the April convention this year on the 24th. So there's a lot going on with that and the responsibilities. So we'll see how it goes for this election cycle, but keeping all my options open.
Now, as you said, you ran for the district most recently in November of 2020, and you were defeated by Representative June Speakman, who was an incumbent because she ran and won the special election in 2019, I believe.
Yep.
You received 40% of the vote to her 59. There's a few write-in votes, that's why 1% is off. But there was no Republican candidate,
Nope.
just you and Ms. Speakman. Now, has a Republican announced for this district? Or in the previous, you said you ran previously, was there a Republican candidate in those elections?
No, the only time I can remember a Republican candidate, the last time I remember a Republican candidate was maybe 2012, and I may be wrong on that, but one of the reasons why I decided to run in 2016 is because in the 2014 election, the incumbent at that time, Ken Marshall, had run unopposed, and I thought, as many people do, people shouldn't just have a free pass to walk into the position. They need to have some type of opposition so they can defend their record and the things they're doing up at the State House. So I figured, hey, if any idiot can do it, I'm an idiot too, so why not throw my hat in the ring and see what we can do? And I was able to get 38% of the vote that time. In 2016, there was a contested primary for the district. There was, I think, a 3-way primary, and Lofton Asensio eventually won that race. And he had his own issues where he had to step down because of embezzlement he was convicted of from taking money from the Sierra Club, and that's what prompted the special election. The special election was a 4-way race with 2 independents. Ken Marshall switched from a Democrat to an independent in the special election. June was the Democrat, and there was another independent. And as a Libertarian, I came in second place in that 4-way race in the special election. So to be honest with you, it's definitely a challenge. I think a lot of people tell me I should run as a Republican or run as an independent, and that I might have a better chance. I would disagree with them. I think people respond to the genuine message, and a lot of people, it's tough to convince them that I'm not running as a librarian. I have to explain what a libertarian is, but it's definitely something when they learn about me and learn about what my principal positions are, it's, the informed voter is somebody who is usually going to vote for me.
Let's talk a bit about the Libertarian, not librarian, party in Rhode Island. How many voters are registered Libertarians in the district or in the state?
Well, that's honestly our biggest challenge. There are no registered libertarians. We are technically not a recognized party in the state of Rhode Island. Rhode Island has some of the hardest ballot access laws in the country. There's two ways of gaining ballot access. One is by a signature campaign where you have to get a certain percentage of the signatures based upon the popular vote in either a gubernatorial or a presidential election. And the other way is to run a candidate in either one of those races and get 5% of the statewide vote in order to get ballot access. The moderate party had some success with that, with Ken Block initially, and Cool Moose, Bob Healy was able to extend that for him, which was able to maintain their party access. But they have since lost that access as well because they failed to get 5% in the last election, the last gubernatorial election. The Libertarian Party, we do run a presidential candidate every single year. Our high watermark was the Gary Johnson campaign, where him and Bill Weld got about, I want to say, 3.5, 3.6% of the vote in Rhode Island, but we're still a long way of getting that 5% of the vote. And I like to tell voters, especially in a very blue state like Rhode Island, more often than not, the presidential vote, many times the gubernatorial vote in recent elections are going to go to the Democratic voter just by the way of the demographics. So you can really have a lot of impact by voting for a third party, especially one like the Libertarian Party that's trying to gain ballot access in the state, because that vote will add to our 5% and help us get that ballot access, where if you vote for a Republican, let's say, or an independent, and they don't win the race, then it doesn't go to actually help the party develop. You just have essentially wasted your vote, which is a lot of the time the criticism that people give for voting for a third party.
Now, the Rhode Island Party says it follows the principles and platform of the National Libertarian Party. Their website says, and I quote, "We defend each person's right to engage in any activity that is peaceful and honest without interference from government or any authoritarian power." That covers a pretty broad range of activities. Can you cite any activities that are prohibited today that fall within the definition of peaceful and honest? Is anything prohibited that is peaceful and honest in your party's opinion?
Well, it's a Rorschach test a little bit because everybody thinks of their own specific thing, but I like to summarize what you just said as do whatever floats your boat as long as you don't sink mine. So really, the libertarian philosophy is anything that you do that it shouldn't be restricted by any type of government body or anything like that. Anything that you do, as long as you're not affecting anybody else's rights, their property is the most important thing. That's what the libertarian philosophy is built on, is property rights. So as long as you're not infringing on anybody's property rights, including their person, their person is the biggest, your individual body is the biggest piece of property or the most important piece of property that you have. As long as you're not infringing on anybody's property rights, anything goes. So we are for the legalization and the decriminalization of any type of drugs. We are pro Second Amendment. We think that anybody should be able to own any type of firearm that they deem is necessary for the self-defense or for any reason that they have for their home. Number one, to protect us from a tyrannical government, which is becoming more and more apparent in the last 2 years that have been going on. Some other controversial things that people like to point to when they point to the Libertarian Party is we don't think there should be any restrictions when it comes to sex work or anything like that. Really, people are adults. We should be able to make decisions on what we do with our lives, what we put in our body, our choice. Anything that you do with yourself should be a decision you make between yourself, your doctor, and your family. And it really shouldn't have, the government shouldn't be sticking their fingers in your pocketbook or in your person, for that matter.
Well, it's an interesting comment because, there's currently a much publicized case involving an individual, I think in Burrillville, who was firing guns in the neighborhood, and then they found out they had 200 firearms, and he's been detained and not released on bail. Now, in that case, this gentleman was a drug addict and clearly lied on his background check forms, which is obviously illegal. But my question would be, shouldn't the government at some point be able to get involved in a basic right, such as the right to keep and bear arms?
Well, the government should be involved in it in the extent that, we're talking about a situation there where this wasn't happening in a vacuum. It wasn't like this guy was just owning a bunch of firearms and had them in his basement in his storage, and that was the issue, and he was happened to be a drug user allegedly. The real issue was the fact that he was firing off thousands of his rounds at different times of the night. Rounds were flying into the neighborhood's property. From the libertarian perspective, that's a direct infringement on somebody's peaceful enjoyment of their property. It violates what we do, important principle of the libertarian platform, which is the non-aggression principle, which is you're not aggressing towards anyone's person or property. So we feel that in that situation, there certainly needs to be a remedy for that type of unwarranted behavior, certainly. Whether or not that's a government intervention would be the appropriate response to that, that's up for debate. There's plenty of private moderation and other factors that you can go down the rabbit hole if you really want to start digging into the libertarian philosophy, which I'll save you some of that, but there's definitely other alternatives and means for addressing these issues, not the least of which, if there's any type of liability for property damage or bodily injury as a result of any individual's action, specifically if they're firing firearms, they should be held liable for it. Whether or not the government is the one holding them liable, I mean, there's punitive punishments in place for drug use. There's for different types of firearms have been deemed illegal. Murder is something that is, made illegal in this country. Yet these things happen on a daily basis. So our philosophy, as the libertarian philosophy, is the government, even if you feel that they should be the ones that are regulating this, they've done a terrible job of doing it in the past, and we think that there's a better solution available in the free market.
But the actual question is, if you believe in the Second Amendment, there has to be some restrictions placed on that right, because clearly a person who's addicted to drugs or alcohol or is a convicted felon, convicted of, say, a crime of violence, their right to own and possess a firearm, shouldn't there be any restrictions on that?
Well, so you're describing a specific issue that's a result of the failed government policy on the war on drugs. So, you're conflating the issue of gun ownership with the idea of somebody with a substance abuse problem. One can argue that the substance abuse issue that this gentleman was dealing with has been exacerbated by the war on drugs and by the black market that's been created by government intervention and making, these types of substances illegal and only available to people who, you're dealing with buyers or sellers who maybe aren't selling uniform product. Maybe they're not as scrupulous in terms of their dosage. Maybe they're providing the user with enough of the product to keep them addicted, to keep them an ongoing customer. So again, you start talking about some of the issues, you can pivot, and I understand what you're getting at is someone with a drug issue or a mental health issue shouldn't be allowed to own a firearm, and I think that's a pretty reasonable assessment. I'm just not willing to walk that path with you to say that the government should be the entity that should be the arbiter of that decision. I think that there's a better alternative in the free market, and I maybe can't give you what that alternative is, but that's like asking me to invent the next version of the iPhone. If I would have known that, I wouldn't be a politician. You
wouldn't be selling insurance either.
No, I would not, no.
One of the principles of the party is that, and I'm going to quote again, all individuals have the right to live in whatever manner they choose, so long as they don't interfere with another's rights, which is, I think, what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But under this system, who gets to decide whose rights are being interfered with? You're talking about, well, the government is not supposed to be involved, but who's going to make the decision?
Well, there's, as mentioned before, I work in the insurance industry, and settlements get solved, or settlements are made all the time outside of the traditional court system. I mentioned before, arbitration is something, and moderation is stuff that is done even in government avenues such as in binding arbitration for union negotiations and everything like that. There's definitely free market available, and just because the government has a monopoly on the court system and makes it unprofitable for competitors to enter that space and provide an alternative solution for what the government is offering, doesn't mean that it wouldn't be available if the government wasn't creating or affecting those market forces.
Libertarians support the right to life, although not in the sense that those opposed to abortion might mean it. The freedom of speech and action unimpaired by government, and property rights including opposition to, quote, confiscation, nationalization, and eminent domain. Mm-hmm. Is there any case in which confiscation of property, say in a drug seizure or an eminent domain situation, are they ever justified?
No. Taxation is theft, is something that we believe in very wholeheartedly. So civil assets forfeiture is also theft. You are taking personal property away from an individual without the due process that's required by our Constitution whenever there's any type of seizure of assets of any nature by the government. In fact, I mean, again, what we talk about as libertarians is that all taxation is theft, whether it be income tax, whether it be property tax. When a government comes and tells you that you have signed this social contract, that you have to be part of a society, and that you're implicit just being born in this country requires you to participate in society and pay these taxes to fund the atrocities that are not only our state government, but our federal government does around the world. It's criminal. And the idea that you're going to say that this is a voluntary action, that we are making these payments for the government to fund our roads or schools, whatever you want to say it is, it's disingenuous, because if you don't pay your taxes, see how long that lasts before they start garnishing your wages and take your house and everything that's associated with it. And if you decide to put up a fight, they're going to come lock you in a cage, or even worse, kill you. So I mean, it really all good ideas don't require force. So if we are talking about living in a civilized community with a bunch of adults who can make decisions for themselves, and we feel that we all have the mental capacity to live in, you believe in the good nature of people, and that most people are just trying to do what's best for themselves and their family, there's really no need for government. There's something that we can develop systems and develop ways outside of government that has mutual benefit for everybody involved.
Now, Representative Speakman has been an advocate for affordable housing. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand on this issue?
Well, I think affordable housing, whenever politicians like to put in pieces of legislation, they always like to talk about the intent of that legislation. And, I think the intent of a lot of these pieces of legislation that especially people from the left put in, I think they're good intentioned. I think that they're altruistic in nature, but the problem is that nobody goes back years later and evaluates what the result of that intervention was. And what you've seen in terms of the affordable housing is a situation where you've created these requirements in towns to meet certain metrics that are arbitrary metrics that have been decided by universal metrics that doesn't, the same for Woonsocket and Providence as it is for, Bristol and Barrington, which doesn't make any sense. And when those forces come in, you have developers come in and they are putting in, types of housing that doesn't fit the neighborhood. I'm thinking of a situation specifically in Warren, where they were going to put a large housing unit in a residential area that was going to tax our wastewater treatment facility. It was going to disrupt our traffic patterns and everything like that. And when you actually do a little bit more digging into it, it's not that Warren specifically has a lack of affordable housing. It's all on how you defined it. The affordable housing, in terms of the legislation that June Speakman is pushing, and the new term that they're pushing for it now is something called workforce housing. It needs to meet certain requirements. One of those requirements are deed restrictions, saying that you need to have it be a affordable housing unit for 30 years plus. Another issue that they do is it needs to have Section 8 tenants. That's another requirement for it to be considered workforce housing. So when you go and look in my neighborhood, in my town in particular, there's plenty of affordable housing units. There's plenty of 3 families, 4 families. I mean, Warren and Providence, you go anywhere and you see them, they're around where you can get an affordable rent. They just don't meet the qualifications of what their legislation is. So what they're trying to do is create new development. And just like any type of legislation like this, there's winners and losers. And the people that end up winning a lot of times in these are the developers and the people that have the inside track. And you've created a convoluted regulatory bureaucratic nightmare where the mom and pop or the small contractor can't take advantage of it.
Representative Speakman is also a climate change activist, as you know, and the legislature seems to be moving toward making Rhode Island totally dependent on wind turbines and solar panels by 2030. And what is your opinion on climate change? And can this state be getting all of its electricity from so-called renewable sources in 8 years?
I think that's an unrealistic goal, and I think it's something that, this is part of the problem with the Rhode Island's version of the Green New Deal. Is that you've created these metrics and these standards that need to be in place and these goals that they need to fit. And, we really don't have that many opportunity. We're a small state. We don't have a lot of commercial manufacturing or, all these other things. So the people who are actually going to be bearing the brunt of these policies are the taxpayers and the regular, average, everyday individuals. Now, one of the pieces of legislation that she introduced recently was to phase out those 2-cycle engines that are backpack leaf blowers, lawn mowers, weed whackers, everything they'll like. And I know from feedback I've heard from a number of landscapers is that the technology is not there yet. They can't afford to do it, not to mention the increased investment that they have to lay out in order to get that equipment, not to mention that they're dealing with their own labor shortages and every other thing that are a result of the pandemic. A flip side of that as well is that I know an individual who looked to differentiate himself in the market where he wanted to create an all-electric fleet of battery-powered lawnmowers and weed whackers, and he was going to have a landscaping business with an electric-powered truck and everything, and that was going to differentiate himself. And so when you have government intervention in there that is providing a mandate where you're requiring people to switch to that electrical, the power equipment, you've now taken away that person's ability to have a competitive advantage and use that as somebody who's willing to make that investment on their own. This goes back to the libertarian idea that good ideas don't require force. If the market was going to start moving in that direction and start, the battery technology and everything like that was going to get to the point, free market principles would deem that people would start making that change and businesses would start making that change to that to those types of equipment. Climate in general is a very important issue, and it's certainly something that is polarized. I think that one of the biggest problems that people in June's persuasion who are really pushing these climate initiatives, you got to ask them specifically, what do they value more? Do they value the environment more, or do they value human life more? Because a lot of the improvements that we've made over the last few years have drastically improved the value of human life. It may have had some impact on the environment, but there's obviously a trade-off that goes along with that. And you may be saying, well, what's the pristine version of Earth? How many people are actually going to be able to survive on that? So, as a human being, as a Catholic, as someone who is compassionate about people around the world in general, I want to see as much energy and as much fossil fuel or nuclear power or solar energy or whatever it is, so we can get as many people and lift them out of poverty and industrialize their communities so they can enjoy some of the great wealth and prosperity that we've experienced as a nation.
If you are elected to the House of Representatives, you would be the only libertarian among 74 other representatives, mostly Democrats, handful of Republicans. Who would you caucus with?
Well, they all seem to tell me that. Every representative I talk to, they say, well, I'm libertarian too, so I think I'd caucus with all of them, right? Because everybody seems to agree with at least part of the libertarian
I don't think they're going to let you do that.
No, honestly, it's something that Does it really matter? You know, the caucus up at the State House right now is laughable because you have a huge tent in the Democratic Party. You've got a handful of Republicans that are up there. And most of the decisions end up getting made between leadership anyway. So the fact that, you know, I wouldn't have a group of like-minded individuals to caucus with, I don't think would be a hindrance to me up there. It would actually free me up a little bit to speak my mind and use the bully pulpit and, you know, and get libertarian points across to the state.
What committees would you ask the speaker to assign you to?
Whatever speaker, I don't know, whatever one's, that's a good question, actually. I don't know, I think, you know, I really haven't given that much thought, to be honest with you. I always kind of figured I'd be a low man on the totem pole and I'd be happy with whatever he or she would stick me on. So that'd be a good question. I don't think I have a good answer for you for that.
The Libertarian Party principles and policies are completely at odds with what the progressive Democrats, who are gaining more and more traction in the General Assembly, you know, believe in and fight for. Do you really think you can have an impact on the direction the state seems to be going?
See, I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that. I don't think the libertarian philosophy is that far off from what the progressive are pushing right now. I think the major difference between the two philosophies is how you get there. I think the progressives 100% think that the answer to the problems, to every problem, is more government. And I think the libertarian answer is just the opposite. You know, this pandemic has been an eye-opening experience for people because, you know, everybody leading up to the pandemic, you know, the government's there to protect us. It's there to protect, you know, that was Gina Raimondo's whole entire gubernatorial platform, was that she was there to protect the people of Rhode Island. And then when we needed them the most, you know, we have hazard mitigation plans in every single city and town in this state. We have a Rhode Island Emergency Management Association that has, you know, binders and binders about how to respond to biological weapons, pandemics, and every other thing like that. And as soon as something like this happened, we threw all the playbooks completely out the window and we focused on just having one person, the governor, rule by executive mandate. And I think that, you know, if you have a lot of people who have woken up to this and see that, you know, the government, there's nothing that the government with enough time and money can't make worse. And I think that, you know, getting more of those libertarian ideas and getting more people to understand that, I think they're a lot more receptive to it now after everything we've experienced over the last 2 years. You know, I think that in and of itself would have enough impact to get more people thinking that way and moving the Overton window to start discussing, you know, things in terms of smaller government as opposed to just continually growing government.
We have a short few minutes left. Tell the audience why, if you run, why should they vote for you in District 68 in November?
Sure. So the Libertarians were silently and secretively plotting to take over the world so we can leave everybody alone. You know, I have, as chairman of the Libertarian Party, you know, I get calls from people who are running for different offices. You know, some people who are interested in running as libertarians. A lot of people who are running for other positions at different parties, looking for the libertarian endorsement. And you know, it's really something that the Libertarian Party is based on a set of principles. And when you vote for somebody for a Libertarian Party, whether or not you agree with that person 100% of the time, you know what you're going to get. We're going to stay true to what we're saying, and we're not going to be wishy-washy. We're going to apply every single question you ask and apply it to the set of libertarian principles and give you an answer. And that makes it so that you can trust what we're saying. And, you know, if I were to get elected, my biggest goal would be up there to get rid of as much of the government as possible and put more of those tax dollars in your pocket, because I think that you know how to spend those tax dollars better than the government knows how to spend it.
If you decide to run, would you be willing to come on this program with Representative Speakman and debate?
Oh, I love that. I know June lives right down the street from me. She's been very gracious, and even when we were opponents in the campaign, she is a political science professor at Roger Williams. She invited me to speak at her class. One of her requirements for her political science class is that her students volunteer on campaigns, and I've actually had some of her students volunteer on my campaign. So, we have a friendly relationship. I don't think there's a lot that we agree on in terms of policy positions, but we're neighbors, and I'd love to have a conversation with her. Every time we've gotten together and had a talk, we've definitely had a lively discussion and shared each other's points of view. So that'd be great.
Well, we want to thank you for coming on State of the State, and I hope our audience has learned something about the Libertarian Party, and I hope you will continue to join us as we move through this election year and have more political candidates come on State of the State. Thank you very much.